I tried to sell my fiancé's house without telling him. I want to say that plainly. Before I find a way to make it sound like something else. Before I dress it in reasons and soften the edges. Marcus owned the house. His name was on the deed. His savings had made the down payment. His hands had painted every room a color I'd helped him pick. And I went behind his back, called a real estate agent, and told her I had the authority to list it. He hadn't done anything wrong. That's the part I keep returning to. Marcus hadn't lied to me, hadn't failed me, hadn't given me reason to doubt him. If anything, he'd been the most honest person I'd ever let close. What he gave me steadiness, patience, a kitchen that smelled like coffee in the morning I didn't know how to receive without feeling like I owed it back to someone else. I'm not writing this to explain myself into forgiveness. I know what I did. I know the word for it. What I'm still learning is where it came from, not from a moment of weakness, not from greed, but from something planted in me long before I was old enough to question whether it was true. My parents taught me that love is a debt, and that family means you pay what you owe, no matter the cost, no matter whose name is on the deed. I believed them. For 31 years, I believed them completely. We didn't have much growing up, and my parents made sure I knew exactly how much that cost them. My mother kept a running tally not in writing, but in conversation, in sighs, in the way she'd say, "Remember when we skipped vacation so you could have new school shoes whenever she wanted something from me?" She didn't do it cruelly. That's the thing about people who love you badly. They rarely know they're doing it. She genuinely believed she was teaching me the right values. Family first. Blood over everything. Gratitude is a verb. My father's version was quieter, but heavier. He worked construction his whole life and came home tired in a way that never fully left his face. When money got tight, and it always got tight, he'd sit at the kitchen table with the bills spread out in front of him and just let me see it. 7 years old, 9, 12. I'd watch him press his thumb against the paper like he was trying to hold something down. And I understood, without anyone explaining it, that I was supposed to feel responsible, not for causing the debt, for fixing it, eventually, someday, when I was old enough and capable enough to finally do what the family needed. By the time I was in high school, the language was explicit. "You're the smart one. Lily, you're the one who's going to pull us out of this." That was my mother. She said it with pride. She meant it as a compliment. And I took it that way. I was special. I was chosen. I was the family's best hope. I didn't understand yet that being chosen by a sinking ship doesn't make you special. It makes you the last person trying to bail it out. The debts were never dramatic. No single catastrophe. Just the slow accumulation of poor decisions, easy credit, and the absolute refusal to live within what they had. They'd refinance and breathe easy for 6 months, then overspend again. My mother would find a sale that was too good to pass up. My father would lend money to a cousin who never paid it back. And then the table, the bills, the thumb pressing down on paper. I watched this for 18 years and absorbed only one lesson when the family drowns. You don't swim away. You go under with them. Or you find a way to pull them up. There was no third option. I never thought to look for one. The word boundaries wasn't in the vocabulary of my childhood. It would have been treated like a foreign language, technically comprehensible. But ultimately useless. The kind of thing people say when they don't love their families enough. That's what they taught me love looked like. Total. Unconditional in one direction and heavily conditional in every other. The closest we came was when I was 16. My father had co-signed a loan for his brother, Uncle Ray, who everyone knew was unreliable, but nobody said it to his face. Ray defaulted. My father was responsible. For 4 months. We didn't know if we'd be able to keep the house. I remember those months in pieces. My mother crying in the bathroom, thinking the door was thick enough. The way my parents stopped finishing sentences at dinner. A for sale sign going up down the street. And me watching it from my bedroom window with a feeling I couldn't name at 16, but can name now, preemptive grief. We kept the house. My father sold his truck and borrowed from my grandfather and worked a second job for 8 months. But by the time it was over, the house had become something different for me. It wasn't just walls and a roof. It was proof. Proof that we hadn't been broken, hadn't been humiliated, hadn't been stripped of the only thing that made us a family and not just people sharing bad luck. A house meant dignity. Losing it meant shame, so complete it would never fully lift. I carried that understanding into adulthood without examining it. It lived beneath every decision, a rule so fundamental I mistook it for common sense. So when my parents called me, 12 years later, and told me they were 3 months behind on their mortgage, a different house, a different loan, the same pattern, the 16-year-old in me woke up immediately. She didn't consult the 31-year-old, she just started solving. I can see, now, that the problem wasn't the money. My parents had made these choices. They had remortgaged twice. They had spent beyond what they earned for years. The situation was painful and real, but it was also the consequence of their own decisions they'd made as adults with full knowledge. But I didn't see it that way. What I saw was the for sale sign down the street, my mother's shoulders in the bathroom doorway, my father's thumb on the paper. What I felt was 16 again, and terrified, and absolutely certain that if I didn't act, something irreversible would happen, something I would never stop being responsible for. I met Marcus at a work event. He was the kind of person who listened when you spoke, not performing attention, actually listening. Tracking the thread of what you said and coming back to it 10 minutes later. That sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. For me. We dated for 7 months before I saw his house. A 3-bedroom in a quiet part of town. Not exactly extravagant, but well kept. He'd repainted the trim the year before. There was a garden in the back that he tended badly, but consistently the tomatoes always lopsided. The herb section perpetually overgrown, and it charmed me completely. This evidence of earnest effort with imperfect results. Standing in his kitchen the first time, I noticed I wasn't scanning for signs of impending collapse. I wasn't calculating what might go wrong. I was just standing there, holding a mug of coffee he'd made without asking how I took it because he'd already paid attention. And I felt something that took me weeks to identify. Safe. It sounds simple. It wasn't. I had spent my entire life in a state of low-grade vigilance, always braced for the next bill, the next crisis, the next moment my parents would need something from me. Marcus's house was the first place I could remember that asked nothing of me. It just existed, quietly, and let me exist quietly inside it. I loved him quickly and genuinely, not because he was wealthy or because the house was an escape route. I loved him because he treated his life like something he'd built with intention, and being near him made me feel like I might be capable of that too. But here's what I didn't tell Marcus. Not then, and not for a long time, even as I was falling in love with him. A part of me felt guilty for it. My parents were still drowning in the same slow debt. My mother still called twice a week with updates I hadn't asked for the interest rate, the missed payment, the neighbor who asked too many questions, and every time she called, I'd hang up and look around Marcus's kitchen and feel something sour move through me. Not guilt exactly, something older. The feeling that I didn't deserve to be here while they were still out there. He asked me once, early on, why I looked sad when I got off the phone with my parents. I told him they were just going through a rough patch. He nodded and didn't push. That was Marcus. He knew when to wait. I should have told him the truth then. I should have said I grew up being taught that their rough patches are my emergencies. And I don't know how to stop that yet. Instead, I changed the subject. And he let me. And we went on. My mother called on a Tuesday evening in October. I was grading reports at Marcus's kitchen table. We weren't living together yet. But I spent most weeknights there when my phone lit up with her name. I answered on the second ring the way I always did, the way I'd been conditioned to, because letting it go to voicemail felt like a moral failing. Lily. The way she said my name. That particular compression of sound that meant something was wrong, but she was going to make me ask. What happened? She cried before she answered. Not briefly, for nearly 2 minutes, while I sat very still and watched Marcus move around in the other room, unaware. Then my father's voice came on, rougher and more direct. They were 90 days behind. The bank had sent a notice. If they didn't make a payment by the end of the month, the process would begin. We didn't want to worry you, my mother said, which meant we've been building to this for a while and now we need you to fix it. I asked how much. The number they gave me was large. Not catastrophic in the abstract, but specific enough to make my chest tighten. We just don't know where else to turn, my father said. Your aunt offered something, but it's not enough, and you know we'd never ask if we had any other option. This sentence, "we'd never ask if we had any other option," was something I had heard my entire life in some variation. It was the key that unlocked a mechanism in me, because what it meant, beneath the humility, was you are the last option, which means refusing is unforgivable. "We raised you," my mother said quietly, not threatening, stating a fact, the way you might remind someone of a debt they'd forgotten. I told them I'd figure something out. After I hung up, I stayed at the kitchen table for a long time. Marcus came in and asked if everything was okay, and I said yes, just family stuff. He sat down across from me and waited, and I could feel him waiting, patient and unhurried, and I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't trust him, because I already knew what he'd say. He'd say your parents need to address this themselves. They need to speak to the bank, work out a payment plan, maybe sell the house and simplify. I'll support you emotionally, but this isn't our debt to carry. He would be right, every word of it, reasonable and correct. But sitting there, with my mother's voice still in my ear, "We raised you. We have no one else." We'd never ask his rightness would feel like cruelty, and the 16-year-old inside me didn't know the difference. I told Marcus 2 days later. I chose a Sunday morning because it felt like neutral ground daylight. Coffee, the lazy ease of a weekend. I told myself I was hoping he'd surprise me. I think I was actually bracing. He listened without interrupting. I told him about the notice, the number, the call. I watched his expression stay careful and even, the way it did when he was processing something he hadn't decided how to feel about yet. When I finished, he asked a few questions. How long had the debt been accumulating? What had they tried? He wasn't cold about it. His voice was measured, concerned even. But I could feel him building towards something, the way you feel a train before you hear it. "I think the most realistic thing," he said finally, "is for them to contact the bank directly. They may be able to negotiate a modified payment plan. If it comes to it, selling and downsizing could actually relieve a lot of the pressure. They'd clear the debt and start fresh. I know that's hard to hear, but they can't sell the house." He paused. "Why not?" I opened my mouth and found I didn't have an answer that would sound rational. Because it's the only thing they have left. Because losing it would break them. Because I can't watch them lose it. I'd heard myself saying this in my head 100 times and understood, dimly, that none of it was a real answer. "Lily," he reached across the table. "I love your parents. I want to help. I can help you figure out resources. Look into programs. Go with you to talk to them, if that would make it easier. But what you're describing isn't something we can fix by throwing money at it. The debt will come back. It always does with this pattern." This pattern. He said it gently, but I heard it clearly. He had seen what I'd been too close to see. "So you're saying no," I said. "I'm saying the solution you're imagining isn't the right one." I nodded. I kept my face still. I refilled my coffee. And we talked about other things. And he believed, I think he genuinely believed, that I had heard him. But while he spoke, my mother's voice had been running underneath his words like a second channel of audio. "You're the smart one. Lily, we have no one else. We'd never ask if we had any other option." He had said this pattern. What I heard was let them deal with it alone. What my gut translated that into automatically, without my permission, was the thing I'd been trained since childhood to recognize as the worst possible failure: you're abandoning them. I couldn't bear it. Not because Marcus was wrong, because being right wasn't the same as being able to live inside that rightness. Not when the alternative felt like leaving my parents to drown. I started looking up real estate agents that afternoon. I told myself, the first time I called the agent, that I was just asking questions. Her name was Sandra. She had a professional website and dozens of 5-star reviews, and she answered on the first ring. I said I was calling about a property I co-owned with my partner, that we were considering listing, that I wanted to understand the process. The lie came out clean and calm, in a voice that sounded like mine but felt borrowed. Sandra asked the address. I gave it. She asked if both owners would need to be present for the listing agreement. I said we'd work out the details. He traveled a lot for work. We'd figure out the timing. She said that was fine. Happy to be flexible. I hung up and sat in my car in the parking lot outside my school for 40 minutes. My hands were not steady. That's the part I need you to understand. I was not calculating, not planning with any kind of cold clarity. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel and my mind was doing something closer to static than thought. There was just my mother's voice, and the image of the for sale sign on Clearwater Street when I was 16, and the pressure behind my sternum that had been building since October and hadn't let up. I went home and didn't eat dinner. I called Sandra back 3 days later and moved forward. The weeks that followed had a dissociated quality I struggle to describe accurately. I went to work. I had dinner with Marcus twice a week. I kissed him when he cooked and laughed at his dead tomato plants and sat beside him on the couch while we watched TV. And, simultaneously, in another layer of my life that I kept hermetically sealed, I was exchanging emails with an agent, gathering information, researching what a forged signature would even look like on a listing agreement. I knew it was wrong. This is the thing I can't emphasize enough. I knew. It wasn't a matter of not understanding the ethics. I understood them perfectly. I had a graduate degree. I was a reasonable, educated adult. But understanding something and being unable to stop doing it are not mutually exclusive states. Not when the thing driving you was installed before you were old enough to evaluate it. Every time the wrongness surfaced clearly, a flash of clarity. Marcus's face. The word forgery appearing in my head without softening my parents' voices came in immediately after. We raised you. We have no one else. You're the smart one. Family is everything. Lily. Family is the only thing. And beneath all of that, the deepest belief of all. The one I'd never consciously articulated but had lived inside for 30 years: if you don't save them, you don't deserve what you have. I signed Marcus's name with my left hand first to see how it felt. Then I did it with my right, the way a person might when they'd practiced enough to stop shaking. Marcus found the email thread on a Saturday morning in November. He hadn't been looking for anything. He'd borrowed my phone to check a delivery notification, and the screen showed a new message from Sandra with the subject line, "Updated listing docs, please review." He stood in the kitchen holding my phone for a long moment before I understood what was happening. When he looked up, his face was not what I expected. Not fury. Something worse. The particular blankness of a person trying to process something that doesn't fit any category they have. "Who is Sandra?" I could have said anything. I said, "It's not what it looks like," which was absurd, because I had no idea what I thought it looked like to him, and also because it was exactly what it looked like. He read the thread. I watched him read it. I watched him scroll back through weeks of emails, and I did not move from the doorway. And the silence in the kitchen was so dense I could hear the refrigerator. When he put the phone down on the counter, he didn't slam it. That was somehow worse. "You listed my house." I was trying to. "You told her you were a co-owner." "I know." "You signed." He stopped, picked up the phone again, put it down. "You forged my signature. Lily." The shame was total. It moved through me in a single wave and I felt it completely. And this is the part I am most ashamed of. Even now, something in me pivoted. It was automatic. A reflex so old I didn't recognize it happening until I was already doing it. "If you had just helped them," I heard myself say. "I wouldn't have needed to." He stared at me. "They're my parents. They raised me. You said you loved me, and then you sat across from me and told me to let them lose their home. I told you to help them find realistic solutions. That's easy to say when your family isn't falling apart." "Lily." His voice was quiet, controlled in a way that scared me more than if he'd yelled. "You forged my signature, on legal documents, for a house that is not yours. That's not a disagreement about family values. That's a crime." I started crying, not strategically, genuinely, desperately. And I kept talking. I said he didn't understand what it was like to grow up without security, that he'd always had stability and couldn't comprehend the terror of watching your family come apart, that I'd done it because I had no choice, that if he really loved me, he would have found a way to help. Every sentence, as it came out of me, sounded like my mother. I knew that too. Somewhere under the tears and the desperation, I recognized the script. It was the same one that had been used on me for 30 years, just handed to someone new. But knowing it didn't make me stop. That's the thing about learning the wrong lessons early enough. They don't just become beliefs. They become reflexes. Marcus asked me to leave that day. He was kind about it, which made it worse. He said he needed time to think, that he wasn't making permanent decisions in the heat of the moment, that he'd call me when he was ready to talk. He held the door open for me. I walked out. He closed it, quietly, without making a scene. I sat in my car for 20 minutes and then I called my mother. I told her what had happened. I told her that Marcus had found out, that he'd asked me to leave, that everything had gone wrong. I think I genuinely expected that she would be horrified by what I'd tried to do. Instead, she said, "He had no right to make you leave. That's your home too. You're his fiancé." Something in me straightened up when she said it. Not because I believed it, a piece of me knew it was wrong, but because it was so much easier to believe than the alternative. The alternative was, you did something terrible and now you have to sit inside that. My mother was offering me an exit from that sitting. I took it. That night, I posted on Facebook. I kept the details vague enough to seem aggrieved without being specific enough to be disproven that I was going through something painful. That the person I thought knew me had shown his true colors. That I was asking for support from friends who understood that family came first. The comments came in fast. Supportive. Angry on my behalf. Full of phrases like, "You deserve better and that's not love," and "He sounds controlling." I read everyone. I responded to most of them. I felt, for the first time in weeks, something like relief, not because I'd resolved anything, but because I had an audience that was confirming the story I needed to be true. A week later, Marcus formally declined to negotiate. He contacted a lawyer. 3 days after that, my father drove me to the house. I still had a key. That was the logic I used. I still had a key, which meant I was still, in some technical sense, expected. My father waited in the car. I let myself in through the side door and stood in Marcus's kitchen, which still smelled like coffee. And I felt the safety of it so sharply it was almost physical. I took some of my things. I sat in his chair. I told myself this was reasonable, that I was retrieving what was mine, that I had a right to be here. His neighbor's car pulled into the driveway next door, and I saw her see me through the window, and I left quickly. Marcus filed a police report the next morning. The pregnancy claim came the week after that. I'm not going to pretend it was anything other than what it was, a last attempt to create a tie that couldn't be legally severed. I wasn't pregnant. I told his mother I was. I told 2 of our mutual friends. I don't know what I thought would happen, that he'd come back. That pity would dissolve the legal reality, that something would reset. My own mother told me it was worth a try. That's when, for the first time, I looked at her clearly. Not with love or guilt or obligation, just looked at her. She was giving me the same advice she'd always given me: whatever it takes. Lily, family is everything. Whatever it takes. The difference was that I could see, finally, what whatever it takes had cost me. The lawyer letters were piling up. The police report existed. The real estate agent had been questioned. The forgery was documented. And I was sitting in my childhood bedroom, 31 years old, using tactics that my mother had been using since before I could walk, and calling it love. The legal process was straightforward. In the end, the forgery charges resulted in a fine, probation, and a civil settlement. Marcus did not pursue the maximum. His lawyer told my lawyer that he wished me well, which I thought, at the time, was something lawyers said. Later I came to believe he meant it. I didn't contest anything. There wasn't much to contest. The harder accounting happened slowly, over months, in the particular silence that follows a disaster once the noise is gone. I found a therapist. Not because I believed therapy would fix anything. I went because the alternative was continuing to exist in the same way I always had, and I had finally seen where that led. Her name is Dr. Marchetti. She is patient in the way Marcus was patient, but where his patience felt like an invitation I didn't know how to accept. Hers felt more like a mirror I was finally ready to stand in front of. The first thing she said that I actually heard, not the first session, maybe the 6th, was this: "It sounds like love, in your family, was always transactional, which means you grew up believing that if you couldn't pay the transaction, you didn't deserve the love." I sat with that for a long time. My parents didn't mean to teach me that. I believe that now in a way I couldn't before. When you're angry, everything feels intentional, but they had grown up in their own systems of scarcity, their own debts and obligations, and they handed me the only map they had. It just happened to lead off a cliff. The map said, "Love is what you owe. Family makes demands that override other people's rights. Boundaries are for people who don't love hard enough. And if you feel good while someone else suffers, that feeling is a moral failure." I followed that map with total fidelity, right up until I forged the name of a man who loved me, a good man, a patient man, A man who had never once made me feel like I owed him anything because somewhere inside me I had decided that his stability was a resource I was entitled to spend on my family's emergency. I didn't do it because I'd stopped loving him. I did it because the love I was capable of giving, back then, was still wearing the shape of everything I'd been taught. My parents lost their house. Eventually, the timeline I'd been trying to interrupt with forgery and deception and borrowed time, it happened anyway. 6 months later, they moved in with my aunt. They argued about it. They adjusted. The catastrophe I'd been bracing against since I was 16 landed and the world continued. My mother still calls twice a week. I pick up about half the time now. Dr. Marchetti calls this progress. I think about Marcus sometimes, not with the desperate reaching back that characterized the first year, but with something quieter, a recognition of what he was and what I wasted. He built something decent and I treated it like a resource. He gave me stability and I translated it into guilt. He drew a line and I heard it as abandonment. Because my whole life, someone drawing a line had meant they were about to leave you to drown. He wasn't abandoning me. He was being a person with a boundary. I didn't know those were different things. I'm learning. The strange mercy of having hit something real and irreversible is that it strips away the room for self-deception. I can't revise this story into one where I was the victim. I've tried. I know what that story sounds like. I told it convincingly for months, but the facts are documented, and the people I tried to tell it to have mostly drifted away. And what I'm left with is the quiet and the actual sequence of events. I tried to take something that didn't belong to me. I justified it with love, and I executed it with panic, and I defended it by turning my shame into attack. All of it learned, all of it handed down. That's the inheritance I didn't ask for, and didn't recognize I was carrying until I'd already spent it. I'm not telling this story because I deserve sympathy. I'm telling it because somewhere there's probably someone who recognizes the mechanism, the voice that says family above all else. The reflex that converts other people's reasonable limits into personal rejection. The trained instinct to solve a crisis by any means necessary. If you recognize it, it can be unlearned. Slowly, with considerable pain. But it can be unlearned. I'm still in the process. I'll probably be in the process for a long time. But I haven't followed the map in 8 months now. That's where I'm starting.